The livestock auction wasn't just in town, it was on Isaac's land. A cruel irony watching men with full pockets bid on prime stock while he stood on soil that was about to be ripped out from under him. The auctioneer was using his barn, his corral, because the main venue had burned to the ground a week prior, a charity case. That's what Isaac had become. He stood at the edge of his own property, the dust swirling around his worn boots, and counted the few coins in his pocket. 62 cents. All that was left after selling his last good horse just to buy himself 2 more weeks before the bank took everything. Then it arrived. The old donkey. It came with the Henderson family's livestock, part of an estate sale after the old man passed. No one knew its history, not really. Just a local legend that it once belonged to the man who owned this very land decades ago. The Hendersons had kept it more out of a sense of tired obligation than any real use. But the moment its hooves touched the dirt of Isaac's property, something was wrong, deeply wrong. Every other animal milled about, grazed, or kicked nervously at the fences. But not this one. It stepped off the wagon and froze. Its head hung low. It stared at a single patch of ground beneath the ancient oak tree near the barn. Stared as if it could hear a secret whispering up from the earth that no one else could. Isaac watched, his own problems momentarily forgotten, replaced by a deep, prickling confusion. The animal hadn't moved an inch in over an hour. It hadn't flinched when kids threw pebbles at the fence, hadn't so much as twitched an ear at the auctioneer's booming voice. The other bidders saw it too. They whispered, they pointed, they shook their heads with the easy certainty of successful men. Even the livestock dealer looked baffled, checking his manifest twice as if the paper itself held an explanation for the animal's strange trance. Then the donkey did something that silenced the entire crowd. It broke its stillness, walked with an unnerving purpose directly to the spot it had been staring at, and began to paw at the ground. Not the bored scratching of a penned-up animal. These were deliberate, methodical strikes. It was digging. Digging as if it knew, with absolute certainty, what was buried just beneath the surface. Someone in the crowd muttered that the animal was sick, probably touched in the head. But Isaac saw what they all missed. The donkey's ears weren't drooping with illness. They were perked forward, sharp and alert. Its eyes, though old, were clear and intensely focused. This wasn't sickness. This was something else entirely. It was recognition. But recognition of what? And a more chilling question began to form in Isaac's mind. Why was every wealthy rancher in the territory now actively backing away from an animal that seemed to know more about Isaac's own land than he did? The auctioneer cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Opening bid, $5. His voice carried a tremor of uncertainty, a sound no one had ever heard from him before. Isaac felt the coins in his pocket, cool against his sweaty palm. He was standing at a crossroads. He was about to make either the biggest mistake of his life or unearth a secret that would shatter everything he thought he knew. The bidding started at $5. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Isaac counted the coins again. $6.23. Everything he had in the world. Do I hear five? The auctioneer's voice cracked. The donkey had stopped digging, but now stood guard over the spot, a silent, dusty sentinel on land Isaac supposedly owned. A man in an expensive hat, a rancher named Bartholomew Thorne who had been sniffing around Isaac's mortgage papers at the bank, let out a loud laugh. Hell, I wouldn't take that thing for free. Look at it, brain dead. Another bidder chimed in. Probably diseased. I wouldn't want it near my healthy stock. The laughter spread, a cruel wave of dismissal. But Isaac was looking closer. The donkey's coat was dusty, sure, but it was thick and healthy. There were no signs of mange, no sores. Its breathing was deep and steady, and when a crow landed a few feet from its hooves, the donkey's ears swiveled, tracking the bird's every move with razor-sharp awareness. This was not a sick animal. This was an intelligent animal pretending to be sick. Or maybe it was just waiting for something. $4? The auctioneer pleaded, desperation now seeping into his tone. Surely someone needs a pack animal. More laughter. A woman in a fine silk dress turned to her husband. My children have more sense than that creature, she said, loud enough for half the county to hear. A knot twisted in Isaac's gut. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He knew that feeling. The feeling of being written off, judged, and dismissed before you even had a chance to prove you were more than what they saw. His farm was failing, his debts were a mountain, and his reputation was a ghost. He was a failure. But this animal hadn't failed at anything yet. It was just, different, and it was being different on his land. $3, the auctioneer called out, his voice a whisper of defeat. Before his mind could catch up, before common sense could scream him down, Isaac's hand was in the air. $3. Every head turned. The whispers changed from mockery of the animal to mockery of him. Poor bastards buying animals at his own foreclosure auction. Thorne just smirked, a look of predatory satisfaction on his face. The auctioneer looked both relieved and deeply concerned. I have $3 from the property owner. Do I hear 4? The silence this time was different. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of people watching a man nail his own coffin shut. Isaac felt their judgment like a physical weight, but he kept his hand high. And then it happened. The donkey, for the first time since it stepped off that wagon, lifted its head. It turned, and it looked directly at him. Sold to Isaac Granger for $3. The auctioneer slammed his gavel down, eager to move on from the most embarrassing sale in the history of the county. As the crowd began to disperse, Isaac caught the parting shots. Useless man, useless animal. Give it a week before he's trying to sell it for meat. Thorne walked past, pausing just long enough to sneer. A fitting addition to your estate, Granger. Dust to dust. Isaac ignored them. He approached the donkey, every eye still on him. The animal hadn't moved from its spot by the oak tree. As Isaac came within arm's reach, the donkey looked at him, a strange, knowing intelligence in its dark eyes. Then it turned back to the ground and resumed its methodical digging. This was no random act. This was a message. This animal was trying to tell him something, and it had chosen him, the biggest failure in the territory, to listen. What is it? Isaac whispered, glancing around. The auction was moving on to better stock, but Thorne was still watching from a distance. His curiosity piqued. The donkey kept pawing at the earth, each movement precise. This animal had lived here decades ago. It remembered something. It knew something. And in that moment, Isaac made a decision. He knelt beside the donkey and started clearing away the loose dirt with his bare hands. The animal stepped back, giving him room but stayed close, watching. 3 feet down, his fingers hit something hard, something metal. His heart hammered against his ribs. He dug faster, scraping his knuckles raw, revealing the edge of a sturdy metal container. The donkey moved closer, its breathing calm and steady, as if this was exactly what it expected him to find. The object was man-made, deliberately buried, and the donkey knew precisely where it was. What in God's name? Isaac breathed. He looked up, seeing Thorne still staring from across the corral. He couldn't let him see this. Not yet. He quickly pushed dirt back over the object, patting it down to hide the disturbance. He stood, brushing the dirt from his pants. The donkey watched him, then took a single, deliberate step toward the privacy of the barn. It was a clear invitation. Follow me. Get out of sight. Isaac had just spent half of his remaining fortune on what everyone believed was a worthless animal. But as he led the donkey toward the shadows of his barn, a terrifying, exhilarating thought began to form. This animal hadn't just been digging for something. It had been digging for him. And it had just shown him a secret he'd been living on top of for 3 years. A secret that might be his only way out. Or a door to an even deeper kind of trouble. Once inside the barn, away from prying eyes, Isaac leaned against the splintered wood wall, his heart still pounding. The donkey walked calmly to the water trough and drank, its thirst deep and real. Then it did something that made the hairs on Isaac's arms stand up. It walked to the far corner of the barn, a corner piled high with old rotted hay and forgotten tools, and began to paw at the dirt floor, exactly as it had done outside. There's another one? Isaac asked aloud, the words sounding foolish in the empty barn. The donkey just looked at him, then went back to its work, its message clear. Dig here. Isaac grabbed a rusted shovel from the wall. The sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across the floor. He hesitated for only a second. What was he doing? Following the whims of a senile animal? But the memory of that metal box under the oak tree pushed him forward. He started digging. The donkey stepped aside, watching with that same unnerving intelligence. The barn was quiet except for the scrape of the shovel against the hard-packed earth. 3 feet down, the shovel hit something with a dull thud. Not metal this time. Wood. He knelt, clearing the dirt with his hands. It was a small wooden box, about the size of a saddlebag, wrapped in what looked like oiled canvas. It was heavier than it looked. Something inside shifted with a distinct metallic clink. The donkey stood perfectly still, a silent observer to a secret 2 decades old. Isaac ran his thumb over the side of the box, wiping away the grime. Faintly, under years of dirt, initials had been carved into the wood. E.M. 1847, Edmund Morrison, the man who owned this land before him, the man who vanished without a trace 20 years ago. The whispers in town said he was a transporter, a man who moved valuable goods for wealthy, powerful people. No one knew what happened to him or his money. Until now. Isaac was holding Morrison's emergency stash, discovered by a donkey that had been waiting for 20 years to show someone where it was. But how? How could an animal remember a spot with such precision for so long? He carried the box into his small, dilapidated cabin. The donkey followed, standing in the open doorway as if on guard duty. By the flickering light of an oil lamp, Isaac's trembling hands worked at the oiled canvas. It had preserved the wood perfectly. The box opened with a dry creak. The sight inside stole the breath from his lungs. Gold coins. Piles of them. More money than he had ever seen in his life. But that wasn't all. Beneath the coins, wrapped in silk, were official-looking documents, their seals still intact. And on top of it all, a small leather journal, bound with a simple string. His hands shook so badly he could barely open it. The first page was filled with neat, precise handwriting. The date read March 15th, 1847. "If you are reading this," the entry began, "then I am likely dead, and my business has been discovered. The coins are payment for services rendered to men who prefer their arrangements remain in the shadows. The documents are my insurance. They prove who I worked for and what I was moving." Isaac read on, his world tilting on its axis. Morrison wasn't just a transporter. He was running a clandestine operation, a secret courier for territorial officials and powerful East Coast businessmen, moving sensitive information and payments through channels that were meant to be invisible. He was a ghost. The journal continued. "My donkey Ezra has been trained to locate my emergency caches. He does not use sight, but scent. I have buried unique chemical markers at each location, a scent only he can recognize. He knows the location of 3 such deposits. Should anything happen to me, Ezra will lead the right person to these resources." Isaac looked up, the donkey in his doorway. This was Ezra, Morrison's highly trained partner. He hadn't been acting strange at all. He'd been following his training to the letter. But the next entry sent a chill down Isaac's spine. "Ezra is trained for more than location," Morrison wrote. "He is trained to recognize character. He can sense greed, deception, and ill intent. He will not reveal the caches to a man driven by such things. He will only lead someone worthy, someone desperate and honest enough to be trusted. If you are reading this, he has not just found you, he has chosen you." Isaac felt the weight of that statement settle over him. Ezra hadn't been digging randomly at the auction. He'd been testing every single person there. He'd been waiting for someone to pass a silent, invisible test of character. And somehow, impossibly, Isaac, the town failure, was the one he had chosen. The $3 purchase wasn't a mistake. It was a key to a fortune that had been waiting patiently for 20 years. The journal described 2 more locations, 2 more caches. According to Morrison's careful calculations, the total value was enough to buy half the territory. Isaac looked at Ezra, a dusty, unremarkable animal that was, in fact, a living, breathing treasure map and a judge of human souls. He finally understood why Thorne and the others had backed away. They had sensed something in the animal they couldn't comprehend, an integrity that made their own greedy souls uncomfortable. And now Isaac, who had nothing, had everything to lose. He had passed the test. but a new, more dangerous one was just beginning. Isaac didn't sleep. He spent the night by lamplight, deciphering Morrison's journal. The locations of the two remaining caches weren't simple descriptions. They were riddles, coded references to local landmarks and star constellations. Morrison was a careful man. He wasn't just hiding money. He was protecting a legacy of secrets. The first cache was hidden near a rock formation known locally as the Three Sisters, 5 miles north. The second and largest was another 8 miles past that, near the ruins of an old trading post marked by a tree Morrison called the lightning-struck pine. Ezra had settled into the barn as if he'd never left, instinctively choosing the very stall that must have been his 2 decades ago. When Isaac approached at dawn with a bridle, the old donkey accepted it without a fight. He knew. Their work had just begun. The ride north was a revelation. Ezra, who had seemed so slow and decrepit at the auction, now moved with a steady, determined pace. He wasn't just an old animal. He was a professional, conserving his energy until the mission was clear. He was following a path that existed only in his memory and his senses. They found the Three Sisters exactly as Morrison's riddle had described. Three massive boulders on a hillside, forming a perfect triangle. Without hesitation, Ezra walked to the precise center of the formation and began to paw at the ground. This time, Isaac didn't wait. He dug with a purpose, the shovel feeling like an extension of his own will. The second cache was larger, a heavy iron box that took all his strength to haul from the ground. Inside, it wasn't just gold. There were silver bars and pouches of uncut gemstones that glittered in the morning sun. Morrison's journal mentioned that some of his more discreet clients paid in stones to avoid banks and records. Isaac's hands trembled as he did a rough calculation. With this second cache, he was wealthy enough to buy out every farm in the county, including Thorne's sprawling ranch. He could erase his debts, rebuild his life, and never worry about 62 cents again. But Morrison's journal was clear. The third location, the lightning-struck pine, held the real prize, the retirement fund. As he was securing the treasure in his saddlebags, he saw them. Riders. 3 of them approaching from the direction of town. They weren't meandering. They were moving with the grim purpose of men on official business. Isaac's blood ran cold. He recognized the man in the lead, Sheriff Dalton Webb. Ezra's ears perked, alert but not panicked. The donkey had likely known the sheriff decades ago, but Isaac was a different story. He was a known failure, a man on the brink of foreclosure, now suddenly in the middle of nowhere, with saddlebags full of unexplained wealth. The truth, a story of a psychic donkey and buried treasure, would sound like the ravings of a madman or the desperate lies of a thief. "Isaac Granger," Sheriff Webb called out as they drew near, his expression unreadable. "Heard you bought yourself that old donkey at the auction. Taking him out for a spin?" Isaac forced his voice to sound steady. "Something like that, Sheriff. The Hendersons said he used to live out this way. Thought I'd see if he remembered the land." The sheriff dismounted, his 2 deputies remaining on their horses, their eyes scanning the area. "Funny thing about that donkey," Webb said, walking closer, his gaze lingering on Isaac's bulging saddlebags. "Been asking around. Turns out he belonged to Edmund Morrison, back before he disappeared." Isaac's throat went dry. "Don't know much about him," he lied. Webb's eyes narrowed slightly. "Morrison was an interesting fellow. Ran a transport business for powerful people who valued their privacy. Never broke any laws we could prove, but he walked a fine line. Then one day, poof, vanished. Left everything behind, including that animal." The sheriff looked at Ezra with a professional curiosity. Amazing he's still going. Morrison trained his animals well. Said that donkey was smarter than most men he knew. One of the deputies shifted in his saddle. "Sheriff, we should keep moving. That old trading post isn't going to check itself." Webb nodded, but his eyes were still locked on Isaac. "Reason we're out this way, Isaac, is we're investigating a report. Some strangers showed up in town a couple days ago. Well-dressed men from back east. They're asking a lot of questions about Morrison, claiming he owed their employers a substantial amount of money when he disappeared. They're trying to track down any assets he might have left behind." A cold dread washed over Isaac. "Strangers? he asked, trying to sound casual. That's right, Webb said, carrying legal-looking papers. They've been asking about Morrison's old routes, his properties, anyone who might know where he kept his business records. The sheriff paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Funny timing, isn't it? Them showing up just a day after Morrison's donkey gets sold at auction. The weight of the treasure in his saddlebag suddenly felt like a ton of bricks. If these strangers were legitimate, the fortune might belong to them. If they weren't, they were hunting for the same thing he was, and they were probably willing to kill for it. We're on our way to check the old Trading Post Foundation now, Webb continued, his gaze pointed. Place has been abandoned for decades, but these strangers seem mighty interested in it for some reason. Mind if we ride along with you? Always good to have a local on hand when things don't add up. Isaac was trapped. Agreeing meant leading the law directly to Morrison's biggest secret, but refusing? That would be an admission of guilt. He had no choice. Of course, Sheriff, Isaac said, nudging Ezra forward. Lead the way. As they rode north together, Isaac felt like he was walking a tightrope over a canyon. Morrison's carefully laid plan was either about to make him the richest man in the territory or get him buried in an unmarked grave. The lightning-struck pine was a landmark you couldn't miss. A giant, ancient tree, its trunk split clean down the middle by a bolt of lightning years ago. Yet it stubbornly clung to life. As they crested the last hill, Isaac saw them. 3 horses tied near the crumbling stone foundation of the old trading post, and 3 men in city clothes poking through the ruins with a methodical, almost surgical precision. Sheriff Webb held up a hand. That's them, he said in a low voice. Let's see what their game really is. Isaac's heart hammered against his ribs. These men were here. They were searching the exact spot Morrison's journal had described. Ezra's ears swiveled, his body tense. He recognized the location, but he also sensed something else. Danger. As they rode closer, one of the men looked up. He was handsome, well-dressed, and approached them with a smile that was all teeth. Sheriff Webb, I presume. My name is Marcus Whitfield. We've been expecting you. Webb didn't dismount. He kept his hand resting casually on his hip, inches from his pistol. Have you now? And what business does the Denver Mining Consortium have with a pile of rocks in the middle of nowhere? Whitfield produced a leather portfolio and opened it to display a document filled with official-looking seals. Edmund Morrison conducted business with our organization. Our records show he was holding significant assets on our behalf when he disappeared. We have the legal authority to recover our property. Isaac saw the papers, but he also saw the man's eyes. They were cold, empty. This wasn't business, it was a performance. Sheriff Webb seemed to agree. Funny, the sheriff said slowly. I've been the law in this county for 20 years. I've read every file on the Morrison case, and I've never once heard of the Denver Mining Consortium. Whitfield's practiced smile faltered for a split second. Our organization values discretion, Sheriff. Morrison handled sensitive transactions. When he vanished, so did our funds. One of Whitfield's companions stepped forward. He was a harder man, with a face like a clenched fist and a noticeable bulge under his coat. We believe Morrison buried his assets in this area. We are prepared to compensate the current landowner for the inconvenience. His eyes flickered toward Isaac, a clear threat disguised as an offer. At that moment, Isaac felt Ezra shift beneath him. The donkey's instincts were screaming. These men were liars. They were predators. They weren't creditors. They were treasure hunters who had gotten wind of Morrison's legend and were here to claim it with force and forged papers. I'll need to take these documents back to town and verify them with the territorial marshal, Sheriff Webb said, his voice now hard as iron. Until I get a wire back, this area is off limits. Whitfield's facade finally dropped. The friendliness vanished, replaced by cold, calculating menace. Sheriff, I hope you understand the kind of influence our consortium wields. It would be a shame if your career were to face unnecessary complications. It was a threat, plain and simple. Isaac realized the situation was a powder keg, and he was sitting in the middle of it. He was on a donkey that knew where the treasure was, with 2 caches of gold in his bags, caught between the law and 3 armed men who were about to make their move. Sheriff Webb's hand moved from his hip to the grip of his pistol. Mr. Whitfield, in my book, that sounds an awful lot like a threat against a peace officer. And I'm starting to think your papers are about as real as a $3 bill. The world seemed to slow down. Whitfield's armed thug reached inside his coat, but Webb was faster. His pistol cleared the holster in a blur of motion. His two deputies drew their weapons in the same instant. A tense standoff, 6 men and a donkey, frozen amongst the ruins. "Drop your weapons!" Webb commanded. What happened next, no one could have predicted. Ezra let out a loud, ear-splitting bray. The sudden noise was a shockwave. At the same time, he lunged forward and began digging furiously right at the base of the lightning-struck pine. The unexpected commotion startled Whitfield's horses. They reared up, screaming in panic, snapped their reins, and scattered in every direction. In that one brilliant move, Ezra had stranded the 3 imposters on foot, their escape route gone. In the ensuing chaos, Webb and his deputies had the advantage. They disarmed Whitfield's men before they could even get a clear shot. A quick search revealed the truth. Their papers were cheap forgeries and their weapons were stolen in a stagecoach robbery in Colorado. They weren't from a mining consortium. They were a wanted gang of thieves using the Morrison legend as a cover for their hunt. After the prisoners were bound and secured, Sheriff Webb turned to Isaac, a look of pure astonishment on his face. "That," he said, shaking his head, "is the most remarkable animal I have ever seen. It's almost like he knew exactly what to do." Isaac dismounted and walked to the spot where Ezra was still calmly digging. He looked at the sheriff, the deputies, and the captured criminals, and he knew he couldn't keep the secret any longer. "Sheriff," he said, his voice clear and strong, "there's more to this story. You need to hear everything." For the next hour, Isaac told him. He told him about Morrison's journal, about Ezra's incredible training, about the scent markers, and the test of character at the auction. He showed Webb the 2 caches of treasure and the genuine documents Morrison had hidden, proving the funds were legitimate earnings. He explained that Ezra's digging wasn't just a diversion, it was the final clue. Morrison's journal had said, "Where the lightning points, the shadow hides the truth." Ezra wasn't digging where the treasure was. He was digging where the tree's morning shadow fell, pointing the way. Together, they followed the line of the shadow to a small, unassuming pile of rocks 50 yards away. Beneath them, they found the 3rd cache. It was an iron strongbox, and it contained a fortune in gold, silver, and jewels that made the first 2 caches look like pocket change. But more importantly, it held Morrison's master ledger, a detailed account of every corrupt transaction, every bribe, every name of every powerful man he had worked for. It was the evidence he had collected to one day bring them all down. Sheriff Webb, an honest lawman to his core, made sure Isaac's claim to Morrison's assets was legally documented and protected. The territorial marshal confirmed Morrison had no outstanding debts and that his unique will, entrusting his legacy to a donkey, was legally binding. 6 months later, Isaac Granger was no longer the town failure. He owned the largest, most prosperous ranch in the county. He used Morrison's old contacts to establish a successful freight business. And the first thing he did with his new fortune was donate the funds to rebuild the town venue that had burned down. Ezra lived out the rest of his days in a lush green pasture, treated with the reverence due to a king. The donkey everyone had dismissed as worthless had not only made Isaac a millionaire, but it had delivered a justice 20 years in the making. Isaac never forgot the lesson Ezra taught him that day at the auction, that true value is often hidden, and sometimes the greatest treasures are disguised as the very things the world is too blind to see. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got another tale of Western justice coming your way that you won't want to miss. And if you're feeling generous, consider a super chat to help us keep these stories from the Old West alive. Your support means the world to us.